Welcome back, everyone. I am so thrilled to welcome you to the 28th video in our ongoing series on research methodology, officially titled Research Methods for Data Collection. Now, I am incredibly excited about this specific explainer because, well, I like to think of data collection as the ultimate researcher's toolbox. Imagine for a second you're building your absolute dream house. You've got a brilliant blueprint drafted by a master architect, and you've gone out and purchased the absolute top-tier, most expensive materials available. But if you walk onto the job site and grab a sledgehammer when what you really need is a precision screwdriver, well, that beautiful house is going to collapse before the roof even goes on, right? In the exact same way, picking the wrong data collection tool can completely and utterly sabotage an entire research project, regardless of how smart or groundbreaking your initial theory was.
So, to make sure we build our research on a rock-solid foundation, here's a quick roadmap for our toolkit today. We'll start with 1. The foundation of data, then cover 2. Primary versus secondary sources, 3. Quantitative and structured methods, 4. Qualitative and exploratory methods, 5. Contextual and digital methods, and finally wrap up with 6. Ethics and triangulation.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Let's pull open the very first drawer of our toolbox, Section 1, the foundation of data.
So what do we actually mean by data collection? Well, it isn't just casually chatting with people on the street or loosely watching events unfold around you. No way. It is the highly systematic process of gathering information from relevant sources to answer very specific research questions, test hypotheses, or deeply understand a phenomenon. It requires careful, rigorous planning. You have to select the exact right tools, identify your participants properly, and crucially standardize your procedures. Actually, think about what happens if you don't standardize things. Imagine asking one group of participants a question in a super friendly, encouraging tone, and then you ask another group the exact same question in an angry, rushed tone. You are going to get wildly different answers, and boom, your data is ruined. So it has to be highly intentional, methodical work.
We can really sum up the absolute necessity of this step with a famous quote by researcher C.R. Kothari from 2004. He said, "Data collection is central to research because the quality of findings depends greatly on the quality of information collected." I honestly cannot overstate this enough. It's the classic scientific rule of garbage in, garbage out. You could have the most brilliant, heavily funded research design in the world, but if the underlying data is poorly collected, your findings become unreliable, invalid, and frankly, completely misleading.
All right, moving right along. Let's look at Section 2, primary versus secondary sources.
This introduces the most fundamental division in our entire data toolkit, and it's focused entirely on where the information actually comes from. First up, we have primary data. This is original data collected directly by you, the researcher, specifically for your current study. Think of running your own focus group or conducting a field survey yourself. It offers incredible, intense control. You dictate the exact phrasing of the questions, you calibrate the instruments, and you pick the precise sample of people. However, primary data is offset by secondary data. These are existing records, books, census databases, or previous studies. So instead of surveying 1,000 people yourself, you might just download last year's national census data. Using secondary data saves a massive amount of time and money, and it offers great historical depth. But, you guessed it, the trade-off is very real. It might be outdated, incomplete, or collected using a methodology you don't entirely agree with. A great researcher knows exactly when to lean into the tight control of primary data and when to leverage the sheer convenience of secondary data.
Okay, let's crack open the next drawer containing Section 3, Quantitative and Structured Methods.
These are the tools designed to gather hard, numerical data and objective statistical measurements. First up in this highly structured drawer is the questionnaire method. This is a massive workhorse in the research world. Questionnaires collect data from huge populations incredibly quickly. They are highly economical, very standardized, and they protect participant anonymity, which, by the way, is fantastic for getting people to answer honestly on sensitive topics. But there are major risks involved. You might suffer from an incredibly low response rate, especially with those email surveys that just go straight to the spam folder. And most critically, a misunderstood, leading, or just poorly worded question creates totally invalid data. Imagine asking a question like, "Don't you agree that our amazing new product is the best on the market?" That is a terrible, leading question. It forces the participant's hand and entirely ruins the integrity of their answer.
Let's compare two other heavily structured methods here. The experimental method has one core function: establishing strict cause and effect relationships by actively manipulating variables. The major trade-off:
Highly controlled laboratory settings can be really artificial. They might not actually reflect how humans act out in the messy real world. Then we have rating scales. Think of a standard survey where you rate your customer experience from 1 to 5. These are absolutely perfect for measuring abstract, complex concepts or degrees of opinion, like daily anxiety levels or brand satisfaction. But they are highly vulnerable to response bias. A classic example is central tendency bias, where participants fear looking too extreme, so instead of picking a 1 or a 5, they just pick the safe middle option of 3 over and over again, simply to finish faster. We've all been there, right?
So, that begs the question, what if we don't want to measure someone's subjective opinion and we don't want to run a controlled experiment? What if we need to measure a participant's actual performance or concrete ability objectively?
Well, that is exactly where the test method comes in. Tests provide measurable, highly comparable data without relying on subjective opinions. They are incredibly useful for assessing achievement, aptitude, and intelligence. Standardized tests in particular have wonderfully established reliability. If you want to measure math achievement across an entire school district, a standardized math test provides robust, actionable data. However, there are significant limitations you've got to watch out for. A test might just end up measuring a person's test-taking skills, or maybe their test anxiety, instead of their real foundational competence in the subject. Plus, poor design can inadvertently introduce serious cultural or language biases. If a test is written using localized idioms or culturally specific metaphors, it might unfairly penalize a brilliant student from a different background, leaving you with completely invalid measurements of their actual abilities.
All right, let's shift our gears entirely now to Section 4, Qualitative and Exploratory Methods. Consider this scenario for a moment. How do we capture the complex human experiences and context that numbers simply can't tell us? If we want to truly understand a student's deep, personal experience with examination anxiety, a standardized test score or a simple 1 to 5 rating scale just isn't going to cut it. We really have to look far beyond the numbers.
And that leads us perfectly to the interview method. Interviews allow for an incredibly deep exploration of feelings, meanings, and personal perspectives from the participant's exact viewpoint. They are highly flexible. If someone says something absolutely fascinating, you aren't stuck with a rigid form. You can instantly ask follow-up questions. You also capture vital nonverbal cues, like a sudden hesitation, a heavy sigh, or a subtle facial expression. But of course, the costs are high. Interviews are highly time-consuming and very expensive to conduct, transcribe, and analyze. There's also a huge risk of interviewer bias. For instance, the researcher's tone of voice or even a simple, encouraging head nod at the wrong time could unintentionally pressure a participant to answer in a specific way, rather than sharing their true, unvarnished feelings.
Let's contrast two more really powerful qualitative tools here. First, focus groups. Their immense strength is exploring shared experiences and group norms through active interaction. Participants bounce ideas off each other and generate collective insights that solo interviews might totally miss. The limitation? Dominant, loud participants can completely skew the discussion and pressure quieter individuals into total silence. Then we have observation. Its strength is providing direct evidence of actual behavior in natural settings. You are watching what people literally do rather than what they claim they do on a survey. The huge limitation here is reactivity. Think about it. People naturally put on their best behavior and subtly change their actions the very moment they realize a researcher with a clipboard is watching them.
Next up, we reach Section 5, Contextual and Digital Methods.
Let's talk about the case study method. This provides a deep, holistic understanding right in a real-life context. As noted by researcher Robert Yin in 2018, case studies are fantastic for exploring complex how and why questions. They use multiple sources of evidence, like maybe combining interviews with historical documents for an intensive investigation of a single school, a specific corporation, or a unique event. However, they have very limited statistical generalizability. What does that mean? Well, just because you discover a brilliant teaching method that works flawlessly in one highly funded specialized private school doesn't mean that finding will statistically apply to every large public school nationwide. There's also a high potential for researcher bias here, simply because the researcher gets so incredibly deeply immersed and close to their single subject over time.
Now, looking at document analysis, this is an extremely unobtrusive and economical use of historical and official records. You can parse through decades of old government reports or school attendance logs without bothering a single living participant. But the records you find might be completely incomplete or highly restricted.
Digital data collection, on the flip side, is fast, economical, and gives you a truly global reach in just seconds. However, it raises major privacy concerns, massive data security risks, and severe sampling bias. By relying purely on an internet-based survey, you are automatically silencing the voices of the elderly, the impoverished, or folks in rural communities without broadband access, which heavily skews your data toward a very specific demographic.
Finally, we get to open the very last drawer of our toolbox, Section 6, Ethics and Triangulation.
Let me tell you, triangulation is an absolute game changer. Here's the process. First, you select multiple data collection methods. Second, you gather diverse quantitative and qualitative evidence. And third, you cross-verify to identify contradictions and strengthen credibility. I want you to think of triangulation exactly like a GPS system for your research. If you only use one satellite, your location is just a guess. But by using interviews, observations, and objective tests altogether, you compensate for the individual weaknesses of each single method and pinpoint the exact truth. If all three methods point to the exact same conclusion, boom, your data is rock solid.
But listen, absolutely none of this precision matters without a firm, unshakable grounding in ethics. The Belmont Report from 1979 identifies respect for persons, beneficence, and justice as the major ethical principles in research involving human participants. We must constantly remind ourselves that behind every single statistical data point, every survey response, and every quiet observation, there is a real breathing human being who is deserving of total respect, dignity, and fair treatment.
So the crucial takeaway here is that there are absolute, non-negotiable ethical prerequisites before you collect even a single piece of data. 1. Obtain voluntary, informed consent. Now, this doesn't just mean having someone sign a piece of paper, it means they genuinely comprehend the risks and exactly what they are participating in. 2. Ensure strict confidentiality and privacy. And 3. Minimize harm and maximize benefits, which is that core principle of beneficence. Gathering data without genuine consent or without ensuring participant safety completely destroys the integrity of the work, no matter how groundbreaking or exciting the findings might seem to be.
So, I'll leave you with this thought. If a study features a brilliant design but relies on a fundamentally flawed data collection tool, can we ever truly trust its conclusions? I really want to challenge you to ruthlessly scrutinize the validity of the data you consume every single day. Look closely at the tools researchers use to build their conclusions and ask yourself if they really use the right instrument for the job. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss out on our deep dives. See you next time.